Last Sunday, I stuck around for the afternoon so that I could go see the star performances across the street at CPAC. They were all very good. Apparently, they removed the weird cat song from the rotation. But that meant that I had a little bit of time to kill. So I was on my phone just looking through things, checking the news, and I saw this headline that broke my brain a little bit. It was one of those things that gets you into the article, and I did read the article, but the headline, this strange thing was, how private equity cornered the ambulance market. Now, in case you don't know, ambulances are very expensive to manufacture and to maintain. They've got a lot of little parts that have to go in. They're specialty vehicles. They cost more than a family car. And many years ago, there were all of these different firms around the country that made ambulances and that maintained ambulances and that kept ambulances going. And they were expensive, but a city or a county or a medical system could afford one, and if they needed one, could get one within a few months. Well, over the last couple of decades, some investment firms have bought up the ambulance companies. And so now, no one knows the exact numbers, but roughly, probably, about 90% of ambulances are manufactured by one of two companies. Now, there might be different local names for the company. You know how companies own other companies, firms own other firms, but once you get up to the top, it's one of these two. And that means there's not a lot of competition. They can kind of charge whatever they want. And something similar is true all through the line of ambulance manufacturing and maintenance. A handful, less than a handful of companies make those cabinets that go into ambulances, make the chassis that an ambulance sits on, make the equipment that goes into ambulances. Just a few firms maintain ambulances, often with exclusive contracts with the manufacturers so that you have to take it for maintenance and repairs to these people. And all of that adds up over time in terms of cost and in terms of the amount of time it takes to make an ambulance, because fewer people are working on it and supply chain issues are bigger. Which means that now it costs more than ever for a city or a county or a medical system to purchase an ambulance, and it takes longer to get that ambulance once they have paid for it. What used to be a few months has now turned into a few years. So someone might be paying hundreds of thousands of dollars, close to $1 million for an ambulance that they might see in 2 or 3 years. And all of that gets passed down to you. You who might need a ride in an ambulance sometime, pay more just to get into the ambulance, and pay more per mile to ride in the ambulance. And hopefully you have good insurance that will cover part of that cost. But what this has led to is people who are injured begging the EMTs not to put them in an ambulance because they cannot afford the ride to the hospital. How Private Equity Cornered the Ambulance Market is a weird and technical kind of headline. It's the sort of article that I would read and any sane person would ignore. But it is also a sentence that should not exist in a civilized society, and certainly should not exist in a society that so often claims to be somehow rooted in Christian values. Our reading today is these two little scenes, these two little vignettes of the early church, to remind you where we are. Christ is risen and new things are possible. And then Christ has left and sent the Holy Spirit to the apostles and to the disciples and to all of these people who are joining this new kind of community that is rooted in this idea that Christ is risen and new things are possible. And they are trying to live as though that is true. In our first little scene, we are told that there is no one in the church who is in need, because people will bring their stuff and lay it at the feet of the apostles so that it can be distributed to everyone who has need. Are you hungry? Well, we'll get together and get you some food. Do you need some clothes? There are some extra in my closet. I will bring them and you can have them. You need a place to stay? So-and-so's got a couch. You can stay there as long as you need to. You need a job, we'll find you a job. You need some welcome? We will welcome you. You need some community, we will be there for you. And in the end, no one has need, because all of those needs are met. Now I know the immediate reaction is that won't work at scale. But I'm going to tell you, I've read the studies, because I read the weird articles. I've read the white papers. I've read the economics books. And study after study, attempt after attempt, says that actually, if you share, it tends to work pretty well. Once someone who is homeless is given housing, that frees up all sorts of options for them. Things that they can think about instead of where they will sleep for the night. If you give someone who is hungry some food, that frees up all sorts of things that they can work on. Not thinking about their stomach, they can think about other things. You find someone who is lonely and give them company. That opens up all sorts of possibilities. Once we can stop focusing on the things that we don't have that we're in desperate need of, we can start thinking about the ways that we can make a new life, the ways that we can live as though Christ is risen and new things are possible. I know that the other thing that people are going to say is, didn't Jesus say, you'll always have the poor with you? And Jesus did. And the people who come to the church in these early days are still poor. They don't have a lot. But the key is that they have enough. And if you have enough, and a little bit more than enough, even if you are sitting there in poverty, it doesn't feel as much like being poor. Somehow that's not the worst thing anymore. You'll always have the poor with you, but it won't matter, because since there is enough and more than enough for all of us, there is enough and more than enough for each of us. In the second scene, we get a different view. See, there are two kinds of people in the church. There are the Hebrews, those who come out of Judaism, those who are carrying Judaism on with them, following a Jewish Savior, a Jewish Messiah, understanding everything according to the rules of Judaism. And there are the Hellenists, the Greeks, the outsiders, the folks who are coming in who are not Jewish. And during this distribution of stuff, especially the distribution of food to widows who have no one to care for them, the Hellenists notice that the Hebrew widows seem to be getting served first and seem to be getting a little bit more, and their own widows are maybe neglected a little bit. So they go to the apostles. They go to the disciples, they go to the leaders of the church, and they say, "We have noticed this thing." And the leaders of the church say, "Yeah, you're right. Yes, that does appear to be happening, but we are awfully busy. We have a lot going on. I mean, we've got the whole preaching the word and healing the people and all of those kinds of things. And we're not sure we can take on the distribution of food as well, but why don't you take it and run with it? Why don't you make that happen? You have full authority. Get it done." And they do. See, it's not just stuff that gets shared. It's work that gets shared. It's time that gets shared. It's effort that gets shared. It turns out, when it looks like there's too much, if all of us get involved, there's not very much at all. Many hands make light work. And because there's all of us, and enough work for all of us, there's not too much for each of us. Now, I know what people say. There's always this attempt to make this into a hierarchy, into a set of rules, into a set of directives, of saying there are those who preach the word and there are those who distribute the food. There are pastors and there are deacons, and we can divide this into 1,000 different offices. We can make bishops and priests and deacons and whatever else we want. As long as everybody has their lane and is in it, everything is okay. And I'm telling you, that is not what is happening in this passage. This is not a rule for all time. This is a practical consideration. What needs done? Who has the gifts? How do we, together as a community, accomplish things? These are two amazing scenes of what a church can be. A church can be a place where everyone has enough and more than enough of the things that we need, and no one has too much to do. That is a church that is rooted in good, solid, holy love. A church that looks out for each other, that says to each other, "What do you need? What can I do for you?" And can meet that need, whether that need is some food or a break. That is what it is, just maybe to be the church, to live in a world where Christ is risen and new things are possible. But there is this idea sometimes that gets out there, that gets into the world, that floats through, that imagines that the church is this appendage that is separate from everything else that is going on. That says, yes, we can be that as a church. Within these walls, there is enough and more than enough. Within these walls, everyone will be taken care of, but out there, Out there it's economics and politics and secularism and all those kinds of things. Out there the rules are different. And out there is a world where there is not enough and more than enough. Where there is too much to do, where there is too much work, where there is too much toil, where we all got to go as hard as we can just to get ahead because somehow private equity has cornered the ambulance market. And that's just how things are. And what I want to suggest is that that is not how it is supposed to work. We as the church are not confined within the walls of this building. We are not confined within the relationships that we have with each other. Instead, we are agents of change. We are caretakers of God's reign of love. We are nurturers of God's garden, helping it spread like a mustard seed gone wild, like weeds spreading their tendrils everywhere. And I don't mean that in some superior Christian nationalist kind of way. I'm not suggesting we get out there and take over politics. But I am suggesting that we can be a voice that says to everything, what if we did this differently? What if we imagined that instead of having an economic system that hoards a lot of wealth for a very few people and leaves a lot of folks without enough, what if we decided not to live that way? What if we together as a society decided that maybe since there is in fact enough and more than enough for all of us, there could be enough and more than enough for each of us? And some folks like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates and those guys probably wouldn't even notice the missing money. And then everybody could have food, and everybody could have housing, and everybody could afford an ambulance ride. Maybe we could be the voice that goes to our politicians and says, instead of hoarding political power for a few at the top, maybe we could try democracy? Maybe we could get power into the communities. Maybe we could listen to more voices. Maybe we could hear more people. Maybe we could do things differently. And we could do that with all sorts of things. There is no part of the world that does not need the voice of the church, that does not need the truth of the gospel, that does not need to hear the words, Christ is risen and new things are possible. We don't have to do it this way anymore. Almost none of us are happy with it. So let's try something else. Let's try a world where we share what we have, whether that is stuff, or time, or labor, or whatever. Let's try a world where we take that enough and more than enough for all of us and make it enough and more than enough for each of us. Now, somebody's going to use strange words for that idea. I know the direction that I'm headed in. I know that that scares us a little bit. I know that we have been told that the world works a certain way and has to work a certain way. And I'm not saying that there is some philosophy or political system or economic idea that is the one way to go. Instead, what I am suggesting, what I am saying, what I am preaching, the truth that I am telling is that we don't have to do things any of the ways that they have been done before. We can imagine something bigger, something better, something more powerful, something more loving, something more gracious, something more merciful for everyone. Last night, I watched a video about trad wives. You know, those folks who get online and make videos about how they wear their prairie dresses and make sourdough bread and how everyone should do that. And the person who made the video had gone to interview some folks who actually did this kind of stuff. And one of the things that she discovered was that the folks who did it, who weren't influencers, who were doing it, were working very hard. It was not a soft life. And they were relying on others, and others were relying on them. And that what people were looking for in that kind of life, what people are probably looking for in every kind of life, is not a single way of living for everyone, but a community in which we can be ourselves, and in which we can have enough and more than enough because we share with each other, because baby clothes are passed on, because a tool is lent out. And maybe if we can grow that, we can have a world where we together as a society say, no one should be afraid of an ambulance ride just because it's expensive. But everyone should be able to get the health care they need. That interpersonal sharing can become something bigger. And by becoming something bigger, we can nurture God's reign of love all around us until it fills the whole world. And we can rest assured that when Jesus comes back, he can look and say, they didn't try to follow me to heaven. They followed my commandments and made heaven here.